All right, Shabbosai, good morning. Let us begin. Incredible daf ahead of us today. Begin by thanking our sponsors. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Av. Paul and Kathy Pollack for dedicating all the shiurim and drushos this month in honor of their grandchildren. The Daf Yomi shir in the schus of refuah shlema for Yehuda ben Michal. A week of learning sponsors, Binyamin Fleischman in memory of his father, Reb Shmuel Yudel ben Binyamin Yaakov Zichron Livracha, and Selma Wolf with incredible Hakaras Hatov to Hashem for the refuah shlema of her granddaughter, Dr. Carrie Davis. We hope that on the merit of our Talmud Torah, all of the Neshamos will have an Aliyah, the families in Nechama, and all of those who need a refuah will have one together with Kol Cholei Yisrael. Well, so with that, let us begin. Today's Daf Nun 50. We are beginning in Meretz Hashem on Daf Mem Tesamud Beis 49b, and we are picking up 18 lines up from the bottom. So a lot to do today. Baruch Hashem. So let's begin. So actually, we started this sugya yesterday a little bit. Amar Rabbi Eloi, Amar Reish Lakish. B'Usha Hiskinu. In the city of Usha, they instituted the following idea. Remember again, Usha was one of the locations that the Sanhedrin relocated to after having left Yerushalayim, the Lishkas Hagazis, the chamber of hewn stone in the Beis Hamikdash. So in Usha, they instituted Hakosef Kol Nechasav Lebanov, anyone who goes ahead and gifts away his property during his lifetime to his children. So again, we'll call him Reuven's married to Rachel. Reuven and Rachel decide to go ahead and give all of their property to their children during their lifetime. In Usha, they instituted Sohuva Ishton Nizonin Mehem, that Reuven and Rachel are still supported from that very estate. In other words, even though they gifted it away now during their lifetime, they're still supported from the estate. Maskif Rabbi Zera is the kasha. V'yitem Rabbi Shlomo bar Nachmani Gedol mizo amru. I don't understand what's the big deal. Chazal already said something bigger than that. They said Al minaso nizones meinachasav hu ve'ishto mibai. If a widow, after the death of her husband, no matter what happens to the estate, the widow is always supported by the estate. So it goes without saying that when people gift away their estate during their lifetime, that of course they're going to be supported over the course of their lifetime from the estate. Where do we see the widow? The Shalach Rabin Beigarta. Rabin sent the following message in a letter. Mishemes v'niach almana ubas. Suppose let's say Reuven died, and Reuven left behind. Reuven's married to Rachel, and Reuven and Rachel had a daughter. So now Reuven passes away. The daughter is the only surviving heir, so she inherits the estate, right? So she inherits everything. So what's the halacha? Almanaso nizonas menachasav. So even though the daughter inherits the estate has an obligation to continue to support the widow. Listen to this. Niseis habas, the daughter gets married. What's the halacha? Almanaso nizonas menachasav. The widow is still supported from the estate. So now again, remember, daughter gets married, that estate essentially now becomes what we'll call nichse mulug or nichse tzon barzel, depending on the nature of the property. She brings that property into marriage. Her husband has rights into the marriage. Nevertheless, the widow is still supported from the estate. Not only that, Mesa Habas. Let's say now the daughter dies. So the daughter dies, but the widow is still alive. Am Rabbi Yehuda ben Achosos Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina al yodi haya ma'isa. I once had to deal with this type of situation. Va'amru al menoso nizones minachasav. They both say pretty wild. So halacha l'maisa, again, what you see is the widow is supported from the estate, no matter what, no matter who's in possession of the estate. To the point, by the way, that even if the estate is now no longer in the hands of someone even directly related to Reuven, the almana is still going to be supported. So the point is, you see, what is the takeaway message? That the almana is supported from the estate up until the point that she gets remarried. So Rabbi Osei, the Gemara says, if you see that an almana is supported from the estate, hu ve'ishto mibai, then it goes without saying that what? That if a man, Reuven and Rachel, gift away the estate to their children during their lifetime, it goes without saying that Reuven and Rachel are supported from the estate. To which the Gemara says, I'll tell you like this. What would you have thought? Hasam hu deleka de tarach. So I would say, I would have thought, in the case of the almana, it could be that the reason why the almana is supported from the estate is why? There's no one else to support her. In other words, there's no other form of support. Literally, deleka de tarach means there is no one to work on her behalf. She may be fully dependent on the estate. Aval hacha nitrach ledidei ledida. But here, Reuven and Rachel might be totally fine, healthy young people, right? Or relatively young people that they could go ahead and work, right? So maybe they shouldn't be supported by the estate. In other words, let Reuven go ahead and go out to work and support him and his wife. Who says that support should automatically come from the estate? Kamash Malon, though. Kamash Malon, the halacha lemaisa, even though Reuven and Rachel gifted away the entire estate, they are still supported by that estate during their lifetime. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Hilchasa kavasei, olas hilchasa kavasei. Shabbos say, this is very interesting because now this is the second time we've seen this, right? Where the Gemara quotes a takana that was made in Usha. The Gemara then goes through it, and then the Gemara asks, by the way, was this accepted? Right? We had this in yesterday's daf also, where in Usha they instituted that you should support your minor children, right? And now again they asked, well, was this accepted or not? So in Usha they instituted that if a husband and a wife gift away their estate to their children during their lifetime, they are still supported by the estate. Gemara again asks, is the halacha like that or not? So listen to this. So the Gemara says, Tashma, Rabbi Chanina, Rabbi Yonasan, listen to this, Havu Kaimi. Right, Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Yonasan were standing together. Asa hahu gavra, gochin v'nashke l'Rabbi Yonasan akare. There was a man who came and kissed Rabbi Yonasan's feet. Amar li Rabbi Chanina, my high. Rabbi Chanina said, my high is such a good phrase. You know, my high, how that translates? Like, what's up with that? Right? That's a direct translation, right? What is that? What is that? Why is this guy coming to kiss your feet? Amrale, so listen to this. Rabbi Yonasan said, Kosev nechasav labanavu. This guy had gifted away his estate to his children, top of nun, va'asesinu lazanye, and I forced the kids to support their father. It should say such an interesting thing. So apparently the backstory to this is, we'll call him Reuven, right? Reuven and Rachel gifted their entire estate to their kids, and the kids didn't want to support the parents. They didn't want to support the parents. It is unfortunately not a new dynamic about what money does to families. It's an incredible, incredible thing that here again, you could have a family that I'm guessing if Reuven and Rachel are gifting away their property to their kids, they must feel some level of affinity towards their children. And here again, the kids get the money and the kids don't want to support the parents. Again, certain things do not change. How many families are torn apart because of money? How many families are torn apart because of inheritances, because of estates, because of money? Because of money. It's a story that's as old, at least, as the Gemara, and probably older than the Gemara. So the Gemara says as follows. So what happens? Rabbi Yonasan says there was this guy, he gifted away his estate. His kids didn't want to support him, and I forced the children to go ahead and support their parents. And that's why this guy, this is the father who's coming and kissing me on my feet. He has incredible hakaras atov to me. So I will say, so ultimately, again, if you say that the halacha doesn't follow the takana in Usha, then it makes sense why Rabbi Yonasan had to force the children to support the parents. But if it's the halacha, then why would Rabbi Yonasan have to force them to comply with the halacha? So the Gemara, it seems over here, Rabbi said that what's unfolding over here is that halacha l'maisa, as much as they made a takana in Usha, it didn't become a widespread accepted practice. And therefore, again, in this particular case, Rabbi Yonasan has to compel the children to support their parents from the estate. Interesting. So I will say, so I just want to point out, so far we've gone through two takanas in Usha. Takanas Usha number one was that takanas Usha number one was that parents have to support their young children. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. Have to support their minor children. Takana number two is if parents gift their estate to their children during their lifetime, the estate has to go ahead or the children have to support their parents. I should say, the parents are still get support from the estate. Fine. But I'll say just before we move on, okay, you know what? Let me just close out yesterday's Takanos Usha just very quickly. So remember again, we saw the Gemara said in Takanos Usha that Shehe Adam Zan Esbanav Espinosav Kishem Kitanim, that parents are obligated to support their children while they are young. So what does that mean? So I'll say, I'm going to quote to you very, very quickly. The Rambam in Hilchos Ishus, Perek Yud Beis, Halacha Yud Dalet says as follows. Listen to this lashon. Kishim sha'adam chayi b'mezonos ishto, kachu chayi b'mezonos banav u'benosav haketanim, ad sheyiyu b'nei sheish shanim. The Rambam paskins that the same way that a person is obligated to support his wife, a person is obligated to support his children up until the age of 6. Up until the age of 6. Mikan ve'elach ma'achilin ad sheyigdelu ketakanas chachamim. From this point, from 6 years old and on, until the time they grow up, whatever growing up means, some level of independence, one is obligated to support his children in accordance with the Takanas Chacham, the Takanas Usha. So I will say, what I want to point out here is something amazing. The Rambam, and it's a fascinating Rambam, because the Rambam understands that there is essentially like a biblical obligation. He compares it to the obligation that a husband has to support his wife. Husband has a biblical obligation to support his wife. The Rambam says, children up until 6 years old have to be supported the same way that a husband supports his wife. Now, where the Rambam gets 6 years old, like where is a whole discussion which is beyond our scope right now. But the Rambam holds support up until 6 is like a din da'araisa. The takanas usha was to support one's children from 6 until the time that they're financially independent. Now, listen to this. So that was the takanas usha to Rambam. V'im lo ratza. What if a father doesn't want to comply with the takanas usha? My kid is 6. He's a very mature 6-year-old. I feel like he is ready to take on the responsibility of supporting himself. I no longer want to support him. So what's the halacha in such a situation? So the Rambam paskins, im lo ratza go'arin bo, umachlimin oso, upotrin bo. We could shame him. We could try to compel him. Right? The Rambam says we can embarrass him publicly. But halacha l'maisa, after 6 years old, you can't compel a father to support his child. So this is the Rambam. So again, up until 6 seems to be obligatory. From 6 and on, that was takanas usha. Takanas usha was 6 and on until financial independence, support your kid. If you don't want to comply with takanas usha, we could shame, we could coerce, we could try, but lamaisa, you can't do anything more. There's one exception. If you happen to know the father has money. If you know the father has money, we know the father has the assets to support his kids, then the Rambam says in Halacha Tesvav that Beis Din could seize the assets. So Rabbi say Shulchan Aruch writes similar idea. This is in Even HaEzer, Simin Ayin Aleph, Halacha Aleph. Chayiv Adam Lazun Banav Ubenosav, Ad Shiyu B'nei Sheish, Afilu Yesh Lem Nechasim Shenaflu Hamibeis Avi Imam. Umisham Ve'ilach, Zanan kitakanas chachamim ad sheyigdalu. So both say pretty much the Shulchan Aruch quotes the same idea. Same idea. Halacha l'maisa, a father is obligated to support his kids up until the age of 6. Again, the Shulchan Aruch doesn't compare that support to the support of a wife. That's why I wanted to bring down the lashon of the Rambam, because the Rambam equates supporting your children up until the age of 6 with supporting one's wife, which is just as supporting one's wife as a biblical obligation. The Rambam would seem to say that's also a biblical obligation. From 6 and on, takanas usha, and then ultimately, again, the Shulchan Aruch adapts the same basic idea as the Rambam, namely, if somebody doesn't want to comply with takanas usha, then halacha l'maisa, you could shame them, you could socially pressure them. If you know they have money, you could extract it, but otherwise, there's no real way to enforce takanas usha other than public pressure. Incredible. I'll say there's much more to say about this, but at least I give you a little bit of the halacha l'maisa. So I'll say now let's continue. So now we're going to have another incredible sugya. Let's begin. Daf Nun Amud Aleph, second line down. Amar Rabbi Loi, another takanas usha. We'll say this is our third takanas usha now. Amar Rabbi Loi, beusha skinu hamevazvez ayivazvez yosem mibechomesh. We'll say an incredible halacha. If you're going to give away your money in tzedakah, now mevazvez is an interesting lashon. Mevazvez, bizbuz, could sometimes mean waste. In this case, what bizbuz means is to dispense. Hamevazvez, if someone is going to dispense their money, ayivazvez yoser mechomesh. There is a cap on the amount of tzedakah one is permitted to give. And what's the cap? The cap is 20%, 1/5. 1/5 of your estate. You're never allowed to give away, I should say 1/5. We'll see what 1/5 of in just a moment. So the Gemara says, time in a Hachi that supports this. If you go ahead and you want to be generous with your tzedakah, there's a cap on your generosity. You can't give away more than 1/5 of your wealth. Shema yitztarich lebrios. What are we concerned about? We're concerned about that if your generosity is too overwhelming, you may lead to impoverish yourself, right? And so there's no point in giving tzedakah in a way that leads to self-impoverishment, right? Because then lamaisa, that is very nice. I'm helping others, and I myself become a tzedakah case. There was once a situation of someone who wanted to go ahead and give more than 1/5, but ultimately, again, his friend did not allow him. Umanu, who was the chaver who prevented the guy from giving the 5th? Rabbi Yeshavev. Uva Amrile, Rabbi Yeshavev, v'lo hinichu, v'chavero, uman Rabbi Akiva. Some say it was Rabbi Yeshavev, and who was the one who didn't permit him? It was Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, so I'll come back to that in just a moment. So let's just finish sugya. Amrav Nachman v'tim Rav Acha bar Yaakov Mikra. Rabbi will say, what's the pasuk? In other words, where do you know that the cap on tzedakah is 1/5 of one's estate? How do you know that? So the Gemara says. Rabbi will say, the truth is, it doesn't necessarily need a pasuk, right? The simple answer is, how did they come up in Usha with 1/5? Again, they figured, like, how much, what's the maximum amount of one's assets that one could give away without putting themselves in financial peril? So the truth is, 20% is a good number. So the Gemara says, but yet the Gemara wants to know, they must have had some type of remez in the psukim. So Mikra, the chol asher titin li, aser asrenu lach. So we'll say by Yaakov Avinu, when he's running away from Charan, he's running away from home and he's running away to the house of Lavan. On the night that he has his dream, he says to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, if you take care of me, right? V'nasan li lechem lechol ubeged lilbosh. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, take care of me. If you take care of me, everything I have, aser asrenu, which literally means what? Aser. Well, we translate it as I'll tithe and I'll tithe. Well, aser is a tenth, which together is 1/20, right? 1/20th. So the Gemara says, "Vaha lo dami isura basra l'isura kama." All right, so the Gemara gets a little technical over here. But 1 second, if you take a tenth and then you take another tenth off that, so they're not equal amounts. The Gemara says, "No. Amrav Ashi, aser asrenu lebasra ki kama." The second meiser will be like the first. In other words, it could have said aser. But the fact that it says aser asrenu means 2/10 that are the same. Okay, so we'll say, let's talk about this for just a little bit, because this is a fascinating halacha on a variety of levels. First of all, if you take a look at Tosas says, Ayivaz is Yosef Michomesh, Befarish Yerushalmi, Shepar Mishoni Yochol Livaz Beis Chomesh, Umikan Ve'ilach Bechol Shana V'Shana, Yitain Chomesh HaRevach. So Tosas says this is fascinating. When in Usha they said you can't give more than 1/5, the way it works, according to Tosas, is at one point in time in your life, you could give 1/5 of your entire estate. Each year then, you could choose to give 1/5 of what he calls revach. Revach could be, let's say, the interest on your estate or your earnings, your yearly salary. So you could give one big gift of your total 1/5 of your value. I don't know if the right, your portfolio, we'll call it your estate, 1/5 of your estate. And then each year a person could give 1/5 ultimately, again, of their earnings. The Shulchan Aruch, let me read you the Shulchan Aruch over here, because it's actually quite a fascinating halacha. The Shulchan Aruch says as follows. This is in Yoredeya, Simin Reish Mem Tes, Sif Aleph. Shir Nesilin Yodam Asages Yitain K'fi Tzarech Aniyim. So I'll say in general, when it comes to tzedakah, what's the din of tzedakah? You have to give, I'll say just a general halacha, that Pasuach Tiftach, when somebody asks you for tzedakah, you have an obligation to give. Now, how much you give is totally up to you. You could give a nickel, you could give $5, you can give 1,000, you can give whatever you want. But halacha l'maisa, when a Jew asks for money, I have an obligation to give. V'im yado maseh, I guess, kolkach, if I can't give to every ani, yitin ad chomesh nechasav, kolkach, fine. Yitin ad chomesh nechasav, mitzvah min hamuvchar. Shabbos says, it's interesting. Ve'achad me'asara mida benonis, pachos mikan ayin ra. So Shulchan Aruch's idea over here is as follows. To give up to a chomesh, to give up to a fifth, that's mitzvah min hamuvchar. That's the ideal of tzedakah. The next level down is to give a tenth. What do we call meiser? That's mida benonis. Pachos mikan ayin ra. To give less than meiser, the Gemara calls, halacha calls, stinginess. Still a mitzvah, but that's not Jewish generosity. So it's interesting, I will say, because the way the Gemara frames it is that like chomesh is a maximum ceiling. The way the Shulchan Aruch frames chomesh is that giving 1/5, giving a 20th, right, ultimately is what? Is the mitzvah min hamuvchar. If you can give that amount, that's the mitzvah min hamuvchar. If you can't give a 20th, giving meiser a 10th is very nice. Mida benonis, but giving less than meiser, again, still a mitzvah, but the Shulchan Aruch says is ayin ra'ah, is stinginess. And then he goes on and he says, V'chomesh zeh she'amru shana rishona me'akeren, mikan ve'elech chomesh she'arevach b'chol shana. And here the Shulchan Aruch adapts the position of Tosas. There's one-time opportunity to go ahead and give chomesh from your entire estate, and then after that you could give chomesh from your yearly earnings. So I will say, really an incredible halacha, because I think people often assume that chomesh is like a maximum ceiling. If the Shulchan Aruch looks at it as an ideal, give chomesh, that's l'chatchila. Again, next level, meiser, less than that, still mitzvah, but ayin ra. Interesting idea in the way we're supposed to look at giving. So I will say a couple of things. Number one, this doesn't apply to deathbed gifts. In other words, this is talking about disbursements of tzedakah while you're alive. But let's say a person wants to structure their estate that when I die after 120, I want the majority of my assets to go to tzedakah. That's permitted, which makes sense, because the concern or the cap of chomesh is why? Self-impoverishment, right? Obviously, when your person is going to die, there's not a problem of that. So I just want to point out, that cap only applies during lifetime giving, does not apply when one dies. I both say, let me tell you one other thing. The Baal HaTanya brings down that there's another exception to this rule. The rule of chomesh is only when talking about giving money as tzedakah. Listen to this. Says the Baal HaTanya, let's say I'm giving tzedakah as a form of tshuva. What does this mean? See, I will say, there is a very strong connection between tzedakah and tshuva, right? Tshuva, tefillah, u'tzedakah, ma'avirnes ra gzeira. What does tzedakah have to do with tshuva? Well, what's the connection? On a very simple level, the Baal HaTanya says, because sin, chet, is egocentric and self-centered. Why do I sin? Because I put my needs before anyone or anything else. What I need is more important. What I need is more important than what God needs. What I need is more important if it's an interpersonal sin than what someone else needs. Sin is the paradigmatic example of self-centeredness and egocentricity. I will say, what's the antithesis of egocentricity and self-centeredness? Tzedakah. Because think about this. We all know this. Tzedakah, we work hard to earn our money. And to take something that I worked hard for and now to give that and to use that for someone else, that is the exact opposite. There's nothing more selfless than tzedakah. It's an incredible thing. So therefore, says the Baal HaTanya, when in Usha they said that you can only give up to a fifth of your estate for tzedakah, that halacha l'maisa was for the halacha of tzedakah. But if you're giving tzedakah, ultimately again for tshuva, the Baal HaTanya says, there's no cap. There's no cap. So for tzedakah given as tshuva, a person is even permitted to go ahead and give more than a chomesh. Now, that idea doesn't appear in the Shulchan Aruch, right? It doesn't appear in the Rambam, but it's the Baal HaTanya. So it's quite a fascinating this. So tzedakah given as tzedakah may be capped by takanos usha, but tzedakah ultimately again given as Tshuva has no cap. One other exception, then we have to go on. I can't stop forcing me to stay on this any longer. We have to go on. Let's say, so again, the other exception to this is, if the post can bring down, if a person is fabulously wealthy, right? Because obviously, again, this cap was created ultimately to avoid self-impoverishment. So let's say, Baruch Hashem, I am fabulously wealthy. I could easily give away more than a chomesh each and every year, and it is not at all going to impact me in any way. Such a person is exempted, right? Everybody's always looking for loopholes in halacha, right? I want to be exempted. Well, here it is. Here's it. We should all be zocha to this exemption. We should all be zocha to this, right? If again, I could give away 30%, 40%, it's not going to make a difference. It's not going to make a difference. Then ultimately, again, halabai we should be zocha. Takanas Usha doesn't apply to you. Good. Let's go weiter, boss. Let's go weiter. Says the incredible. By the way, there's so much more to say about this as well. But again, we'll have to save it for a different time. Fine. So we did that. So Amr of Simi Barashi Ushmuos Halalu Misma'atos V'Holchos. I will say, by the way, if you notice, just as an aside, the Takanas Usha, we now have 3 Takanas Usha, right? The first one about supporting your kids. The second one that parents are supported from the estate if they give a lifetime gift. And number 3, cap on tzedakah. So both say there were more names associated with, the names decreased. In other words, the names in which these halachas were given over decreased as we went along. So the Gemara says, Simanach, Kitanim, Kasr, Bizbizu. Fine. I'm Rabbi Yitzchak. Bush Eskinu, another one. Both say it's a fascinating one. In Usha, they decreed. Shei Adam Miskalgel in Beno, Ad Shtei Mesrei Shana. Both say a person should deal kindly with their son up until the age of 12. Look at Rashi. Megalgel and Beno, imisarev milil mod, yegalgel imo benecha sudavam rakim. Let's say my son doesn't want to learn. My son doesn't want to learn Torah. So up until the age of 12, deal with him kindly. Mikan ve'elech, yored imo lechayev. After 12, if my kid doesn't want to learn, he doesn't want to get his act together, that's when we begin to deal sternly with children. And Omid Rashi, look at Rashi says, lirdosa b'ritzua, literally again to hit him with a strap, u'bechoser lechem, and withhold food. So pretty intense. So I will say, so the Gemara says over here, obviously just difference in child rearing practices. So I will say, so Lamaisa, it's just fascinating. When the child is young, deal softly with them. When the child is older but doesn't want to get their act together, that's when Usha, they said, one should deal more strictly with their child. Amr lei, Rav Shol bar Shilas, B'tzirmi bar Shis lo takbil, bar Shis kabil v'safi leketura. So I'm sorry, the Gemara says, Ini, is this so? It's actually so fascinating that the way the Gemara has it, because right, intuitively we would think just the opposite. In other words, the time actually to be a little bit stricter is when children are younger, because when they're younger, they're a bit more receptive and a bit more malleable. As children get older is when they become more defiant. So it's interesting how, again, obviously, it could just be reflecting of just different child rearing norms, different chinuch norms. So one would have thought, no, set the rules and set the strictures with younger children, because when they become older, it's going to be, again, Chazal had the opposite approach. Ini, is this so? Varmali Rav Shmuel bar Shilas, yet Rav Seter Shmuel bar Shilas, B'tzirmi bar Shis, lo takbil. So listen to this, Rabbosai. So Rav Seter Rav Shmuel bar Shilas was a noted mechanich. He was a Malamed. He was a Rebbe. So he said to Shlosh, don't accept children younger than 6 years old. Don't accept kids less than 6. Rabbosai is incredible. Why? Because kids less than 6 years old are not ready to sit. They're not ready to sit. By the way, it's fascinating. Our educational system is we have this idea that kids should be able to sit, and that they should be able to sit for prolonged periods of time. And if they can't sit for prolonged periods of time, they're behavioral issues. A child who can't sit for prolonged periods of time is not sometimes there are behavioral issues, but more often than not, they're just kids. They're just kids. So they can sit for a little bit of time, but they need to run around for a lot more time. So this is incredible. So Rav said to Shlomo bar Shilas, don't take kids less than 6 years old. It's not going to work. But from 6 years old and on, you can take them. This is incredible. V'safi leketura. Stuff them with Torah like an ox. So I'll say, the idea is apparently just like you force feed an ox, force feed the kids the Torah. In other words, that even at six, take a strong-handed approach to chinuch. So you see from here that at a younger age, they're taking a stronger approach. So the Gemara says, in Safi Leketura, yeah, you could go and stuff them like an ox. In other words, that go ahead and be a little bit forceful. Mihu eno yoret imo lechayiv. I will say the lashon of yoret imo lechayiv means like punishment. Punishment. So in other words, you could go ahead and have standards and be a little bit forceful, but punishment for non-compliance doesn't come until later. V'bai sema lo kashya hala mikra hala mishnah. It could also be referring to different things. It could be referring to a young age. Kids might be ready for chumash. But for Mishnah, don't start them until later. Damar Abaye, because Abaye said, Amri li'eim, my mother said to me, Bar Shis l'mikra, at 6 years old, the child could do Chumash. Bar Eser l'mishnah, at 10 years old, Mishnah. Bar Tleiser l'ta'anisa me'es la'es. In the 13th year already, they're ready to fast. They're ready to fast for 24 hours. Ubetinokes, Bas Treser. And for a girl, the 12th year. Amra Abaye said, Amri li'eim, my mother said to me, Hai Bar Shis, the Tarkale Arkaba. So we'll say, so just before we go on, the Gemara is going to, well, actually, let's finish up the sugya. So we'll say, again, I just want to point out, like, here's a perfect example of where a takana was made reflecting societal norms, right? And again, I will say the truth is corporal punishment, I don't know if it worked or it didn't work, but it was standard, right? Both in child rearing as well as in chinuch. Obviously, we have very different approaches, and our times require very different approaches, right? I will say in general, again, children need rules, and children need structure, and children need repercussions and ramifications. But the truth is, at least, in child, I should say, in raising one's children and in chinuch, it has to be so much more love than anything else, so much more acceptance. Again, not acceptance to the exclusion of rules, because if you don't have rules or expectations or standards for your children, you're doing them a disservice, right? If they can get away with anything or do anything, that's not love. That's not love. That's a disservice. But Lamaisa, the standard that they're espousing over here just reflects a different kind of societal setup. So the Gemara goes like, I'm really aim. Hi bar shis, the tarkale arkaba, biyoma demashlim shis. If you have a child, who is sick, who on the day of that they complete their 6th year is bitten by a scorpion, lo chai, such a child will not live. Maya sase, so what's the cure? Merarta didaya chiyurta, take the bile of a white vulture, beshikra, and beer. Okay, what do? The shafye v'nashke, so smear the bile on the wound and drink the beer. It's the good old beer and bile remedy, right? The beer and bile. So the Gemara says, fine. Hi bar shasa, the tarik le zibura biyoma demashlim shasa. If you have a child who again was bitten by a bee, stung by a bee, on the day that he completed his 1st year, lo chai, he's not going to live. Maya asvase, so what's the cure? Atzvasa de dikla b'maya, the shafi v'nashke, take palm bast, mix it with water, smear it on the affected area, and drink it as well. Okay. Amrav Katina. Kalamachnis espino pachos ben shesh. Listen to this. Anyone who puts his child in yeshiva, puts his son in yeshiva, his son is cheder, less than 6 years old, ratz acharav ve'ino magio. He's going to run after this child and won't catch up with him. Now, both say the way Rashi understands this over here is as follows: this child's health will be compromised. Why? Because a child at less than 6 years old should not be sitting in school. A child less than 6 years old should be running around and playing. So if you put him in school too early and he doesn't have the proper outlets for his vitality, his health will suffer. And if his health suffers as a young child, you won't be able to catch up with him. In other words, once health is compromised as a young child, it's difficult to get his health back on the rails later on in life. Ike da Amri, others say, no, that's not what it means. What it means is, if you start educating your child in Torah at a young age, he will surpass his friends. His friends will run after him, but they will never be able to catch up, which means he'll be ahead of his peers. So the Gemara says, the truth is, they're both right. This child will be smarter than anyone else, be a great Talmid Chacham, but what? He'll also be weaker than anyone else. The other possibility is it depends on the kid. Hadikachish, hadibari. They both say different children need different things. Some young children need, again, to bolster their vigor and vitality by running around, not sitting in school. Other children, Baruch Hashem, who are healthier, have the ability to already start a bose. The incredible thing about this, the takeaway from this is not about discipline. The takeaway about this is how Chazal were looking at children as individuals and also recognized that different kids need different things, right? So the six-year-old who is healthy may be able to sit in school, and the 6-year-old who's not as healthy is not ready to sit in school and needs to run around. Because Chazal already understood there's no such thing as a model that works for every single child. It's the Lashon of Shalom Melech and Mishlei of the Chanoch L'Na'ar Al Pi Darko. Every child needs their own model, needs their own plan. It's such, Chazal already understood this. Rabbi Yossi Rechanino. Busha Sinabosai, another Takana Susha. Incredible. Ha'isha Shamachra Benichse Melog B'chaye Baila Umesa. Habal Motzi Mi'ad Alakuchos. But another interesting Takana Susha. If a woman dies, a woman who sold her Nuchse Melog during the lifetime of her husband. I will say, what's Nichse Melog? Nichse Melog is property that is owned by who? By the woman. Let's say inheritance or dowry that her father gave her. She sells off this Nichse Melog during her marriage. What's the halacha? If she dies, Umesa, Habal Motzi Mi'ad Alakuchos, the husband has the ability to extract this property from the purchasers. So in other words, essentially, the husband is considered to be like a first position creditor when it comes to his wife's nichsei mulug. So during her lifetime, he doesn't have a right to go ahead and do anything with it. He could use it for peiros, but he doesn't have a right to extract it. But when she dies, he has the ability to extract it. So Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef and Rabbi Avo, and he was standing amongst people in Usha. Amrlei, man mara dishmaita deusha. Who is the author? Who is the one who said this? Amrlei Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. It was Rabbi Yossi Bar Chanina. So he learned it. He reviewed it with him 40 times, and it was if after reviewing it 40 times, he felt that he had it in his pocket. Had it in his pocket is like the Talmudic expression for, I have a handle on this. Rabbi says some beautiful Gemaras over here. Ashrei Shomrei Mishpat Osei Tzedakah B'Chaleis. Praised is the one. Praiseworthy is one. Shomrei Mishpat, who keep the Mishpatim, Oset Tzedakah B'Chaleis, who go ahead and perform acts of kindness, acts of charity at all times. V'chi afshar lasos tzedakah b'chaleis. The Bible says, is there anyone who could do tzedakah at all times? The Bible says, listen to this. Dashura b'seinu shebiyavne. The rabbis in Yavne, when the business was in Yavne, they said, Amru le Rabbi Eliezer, Zehazon banav ubnosav kishem ketanim. They will say, what does it mean? Oset tzedakah b'chaleis. This is someone who supports his children when they're young, right? Because when I'm supporting my children, the truth is every moment when you have young children at home, what's happening? You're supporting them, right? Every moment you're supporting them. That's oset tzedakah b'chaleis. That's an example of one who does tzedakah at all times, supporting young children. I'll tell you, it's actually Rabbi Shlomo Nachmani Amar Zeh Magadol Yosam Yisom B'Soch Beiso Masiyan. This refers to someone who raises an orphan boy or an orphan girl, and marries them off. So someone who takes achrayis to take care of an orphan is someone who's doing tzedakah b'chalei. So I will say, I'll tell you, the Gemara is teaching on such an incredible lesson. So I will say, what the Gemara is saying is, what does it mean to do tzedakah at all times? It means to take care of your family. Sometimes when we think about chesed and opportunities for chesed, so it's so interesting how our mind automatically goes to things outside of our sphere of influence, right? What is the definition of chesed or of tzedakah? Helping someone else. We sometimes forget that sometimes the most profound acts of tzedakah that we perform and the most profound acts of chesed that we perform are for the people who often live under the same roof as we do. The ability and the profundity of performing tzedakah and chesed for your own family members. You go ahead and you take time to listen or to speak to your wife, even when it's inconvenient for you. You take time to go out of your way to do something for your kids, even though you have other things you have to do. That's oset tzedakah b'chol eis. B'chol eis. Tzedakah and chesed is not only for people who you don't know, right, or for people who are outside of your nuclear family. There's tzedakah and there's chesed to be done for those who are closest to you in each and every moment. And the Gemara says the gadlus of that is, that's oset tzedakah b'chol eis. When you're good to your family, when you're attentive to your family, when you're loving to your family, when you go out of your way to do for your family, not to the exclusion of others. So that's tzedakah b'chol eis. Every other person I do tzedakah for, chesed for, that's episodic chesed, episodic tzedakah. But the tzedakah, the chesed you do for your family, that's constant and consistent, incredible. So the Gemara goes weiter. Hon va'osher beso, v'tzidkas amed eslad. What does it mean? Hon va'osher beso. That literally, again, there's wealth and grandeur in my home, right? And my tzedakah, my charity stands forever. One says this refers to someone who learns Torah and teaches it. Sirabo said the idea is I learn Torah. That's the hon va'osher bebeso. That refers, since I learn, there is wealth in my home. Utstakasa omedes la'ad means, so if you look at Rashi says over here, the idea of hon va'osher means the wealth I acquire doesn't diminish. Doesn't diminish. So I will say, so therefore, if I learn Torah, I have the wealth in my home. And if I teach it, ultimately again, so the wealth is maintained because I've now shared it with others. Look at Rashi. Zehalome Torah malamda miskayemes bo harihon va'osher beveso v'tzidkasa omedes la'ad al shetarch l'lami l'talmidim. So we'll say hon va'osher beveso. I learn Torah. V'tzidkasa omedes la'ad. I share it with others. See, I was saying that which you acquire for yourself is beautiful. But when you share something you have with others, you ensure eternality for those items. So I will say, I don't have time for this, but this I want to tell you, like, remember beforehand when we saw the Gemara, ultimately again, of Takanas Usha, that you can't give away more than a fifth? Remember who the two Rabbanim who were involved in it were? You know who they were? Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Yeshavev. Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yeshavev were amongst the Asar Harugei Malchus. Right? They lived in the time of Hadrianic persecution. Why are these Rabbanim the ones involved in giving away vast amounts of tzedakah? Because I will say these were two people who understood that you could hold on to absolutely nothing in life. And the only things that really endure forever are ultimately, again, the things you do for others. Those are the things. It's not your wealth you hold on to. It's the tzedakah you give that is eternally yours. Because your wealth is yours today. Tomorrow, the market takes a turn. Chas v'shalom lo aleinu rachmana litzlan, right? So again, and suddenly all of that wealth is gone. One bad business decision, everything you worked for, gone. Everything you, quote unquote, own could be gone in a moment. But the tzedakah you give, the Torah you teach, the things you do for others, those are the things that are locked in for eternity. Nothing you do could ever take that away. Rabbi Yeshavev, Rabbi Akiva understood that. So the Gemara says over here, you learn Torah, that's beautiful. Hon va'osher bebeso. You have wealth in your home, but you share it with others. That's tzidkasa omedes la'ad. That which you take of yours and you share with others, that's locked in for eternity. Nothing could ever take that from you. So incredible. So the Gemara says, others say this refers ultimately again to someone who writes Tanakh and shares it with others, because you write the Sefer, that way the Sefer is intact, hon va'osher beveso, v'tzidkasa omedes la'ad, sharing it with others, ultimately again allows for that eternal schos. V'ra banim levanacha shalom al Yisrael, u're'ei banim levanacha shalom al Yisrael, and you will see children to your children, shalom al Yisrael. Am Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, kevan shebanim levanacha shalom al Yisrael. Once your children have children, then they're shalom al Yisrael. Why? The Rose is incredible. Fascinating. Once my child has a child, I know now that at least my daughter is no longer subject to chalitza and yibum. Or I should say my son, right? There's no longer chalitza and yibum, right? So once you have it's an incredible thing. Once I have a grandchild, I know that my children are no longer subject to yibum and chalitza. And there's a certain shalom in that. Rabbi Shua bar Nachani, Amar Kevan Shebanim Levanecha, Shalom al Dayani Yisrael, Delo Asi Litzinuye. So I'll say, once you have grandchildren, ultimately, again, there's shalom on the dayanim, on the beis din. Why? Because there's no inheritance disputes, right? Because what happens if my child chas v'shalom dies without heirs and they have an estate? So who inherits it? Once my child has children, it's clear. There's a clear line of succession. I know who is going to inherit the estate, and therefore there is shalom. I will say so much to say, but okay, let's go right there. So also Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, when he became the Nasi, the Mishnah said, darshan the following idea. We'll say Amud Beis. Don't worry, we are right on schedule. Do not worry. So it says the Gemara, Yosef Rav Yosef Kamed Rav Hamnuna. Yosef Rav Hamnuna v'Ka'amar Kishem Shein Abanim Yarshin Ela Min HaKarka Kach Ein Habanos Nizonos Ela Min HaKarka. So this is actually quite fascinating. So Rav Yosef was sitting before Rav Hamnuna, and he said as follows. Rav Hamnuna said, the same way that sons only inherit real property, so too daughters are only sustained from real property. So the Gemara says, Avish alei kuli alma. Everybody began to go ahead and yell at Rav Hamnuna. So the Gemara says, I'm sorry, at Rav Yosef, excuse me. So Avish kuli alma, the shavik aru hu diyar silei libnei. The lo shavik aru lo yar silei libnei. What? That doesn't make any sense. If somebody goes ahead and so what Rav Yosef seemed to be saying was that halacha l'maisa, the same way boys only inherit real property, so too girls are only sustained from real property. I said, what doesn't make any sense? Boys only inherit real property. So let's say Ruvain dies. He owns no real estate. He owns no real property, but he owns stock portfolios, and he owns cattle, and he owns different things. His kids don't. There's no inheritance by movable property. That's simply not true. So the Gemara says, Amrali Rav Yosef v'dilma. So I'm sorry, we'll say this is Rav Hamnuna saying this. Amrali Rav Yosef v'dilma Kesuvos b'nin dichrin ka'amar mar. So Rav Yosef said to Rav Hamnuna, maybe when you made this statement, you're talking about Kesuvos b'nin dichrin. Rabbi say we mentioned this in yesterday's daf. We haven't seen this sugya yet. This is in a couple of weeks. You're going to get to this. Kesuvos b'nin dichrin, Rabbi say, was a takana, which in the ksuva it was written as follows. A woman would have written in her ksuva, in the event that I die, well, no, everybody dies. When I die, my ksuva should be inherited by my sons. And I will say the chap of that was really specifically in a situation where, let's say Reuven was marrying Rachel, and let's say Rachel had sons with Reuven, but let's say Reuven also had other wives. Rachel wants her ksuva to be inherited by her children and not shared with Reuven's other kids. So what she stipulates in her ksuva is, when I die, my ksuva should be inherited by my sons. And by the way, that should not impact the rest of the estate settlement. In other words, my son should still inherit with the other sons the rest of your estate, but my son should inherit my ksuva. So maybe when Rav Hamnuna said this idea before, that sons only inherit if there's real property, that was talking about Kesuvos b'nin dichrin. That in this case, when the mother legislates this in her ksuva, that clause, what we call Kesuvos b'nin dichrin, only applies to real property. Amarle, Rav Hamnuna said, Mar de Gavra Rabba hudiyadamai kamina. Yes, you who are a great man understood what I meant. And I wasn't referring to the general laws of property. What I meant was the concept of Kesuvos b'nin dichrin only applies to real property, doesn't apply to movable property. I will say, such an incredible yisod. Everyone jumped on Rav Hamnuna, but Rav Yosef, who was a little bit smarter than everyone else, understood what he was saying. How many times we jump on people for things that they say, and we don't recognize or understand what it is that we're saying? If we just took a little bit more time to clarify what it is that they meant, perhaps we wouldn't get as upset about what they say. Rav Chia bar Yosef. So we'll say, let's talk about this just a little bit. So Rav Chia bar Yosef, Rav Zan Michite de Aliyah. Rav went ahead and supported, and I will say this is talking, now we're going back now to the case of girls. Remember again, so what did the Mishnah say? As much as there is no chiyuv mezonos for girls, according to the Mishnah, halacha l'maisa, when the father dies, daughters are supported from the estate. Daughters don't inherit necessarily, right, if there are sons, but they are supported from the estate. So the Gemara tells a story. Rav went ahead and supported daughters. In other words, mechiti de aliyah. Now look at Rashi just a moment. Rav zan mechiti de aliyah, yisomos ba'o lefanav, v'tovos mezonos. This was a case of girls. Their father died. They came before Rav. They wanted support from the estate. So Rav supported them from the wheat of their father's estate. There was no karka. There was no real property. Rav supported them from the wheat. Ibai lahu, parnasa havya, umay aliyah mal yusa da'av. So Rabbi say, was this parnasa? Now we're going to see parnasa doesn't mean support. Parnasa means dowry. Maybe these girls were getting married and Rav was giving them a dowry from the metaltalin of their father's estate. Umay aliyah, what does aliyah mean? Me'iluya, ultimately from the best of the property. Ukidah Shmuel, Damar Shmuel, leparnasa shamin ba'av. Now we'll say in general, if a father passes away and now his daughters need to get married, Beis Din gives the daughters dowry from the estate. How do they know what to give? they assess what kind of guy was the father, what kind of dowry would he have given his daughters, and we give that. O Dilma Mizoni Mamishava. Maybe no, maybe Rav wasn't giving them dowry, maybe he was giving them zonos. Umay Aliyah, Midvarim Tovim Shnemru Ba'aliyah. And what does it mean he gave them from Aliyah? From the good things that were said in the attic. What was said in the attic? Amar Rav Yitzchak Bar Yosef, Ba'aliyah Eskinu Shiu Benos Nizonos Minam Taltalin. In the attic, they stipulated, they made a takana, that daughters should be supported even from metaltalin. So we're going to stop with this over here for today. I'm leaving you a little of a cliffhanger. So here's what we know. Here's what we know. We now see, now the interesting question is, we know that when a father dies, girls are supported from the estate. So we know, so now the shaila is, when girls are supported from the estate, does that mean only from real property of the estate or even from movable property of the estate? We now have a case of Rav giving daughters movable property from the estate. What we don't know is what? Is he giving them for their dowry, or is he giving them mizonos? Emir Hashem resolution, continuation, resolution, b'shatov maslachas tomorrow, shkoyach. Thank you again. All right, have a great day, everyone.